I'm Amanda Riley, 33 years old, and I never thought I'd watch my family unravel beneath the stained glass ceiling of our library. The lawyer had just said the words that pulled the air straight from my lungs, that my parents had gifted $5 million in cash and property to my sister Brooke out of what was meant for all three of us. And then the impossible happened. Grandpa Harold, who hadn't stood on his own in over a year, pushed back his plaid blanket, rose from his chair, and said 7 words that changed everything. I know exactly what you've been doing before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever seen the mask drop from someone you thought you knew, hit that like and subscribe button. My story starts long before that day in the library, long before the inheritance, or the transfer papers, or the lies. I grew up in a world most folks can't imagine. Willow Ridge stood like a fortress above the Connecticut shoreline, all white columns, and manicured lawns and views that stretched out over the water like a painting in a museum. My parents, Charles and Evelyn Riley, ruled over it like royalty, my father in tailored suits, my mother with a glass of white wine in one hand and a guest list in the other. They raised us to believe in legacy and discipline and image. We weren't allowed to wear jeans to breakfast or speak at the table, unless spoken to. Every Christmas photo was coordinated down to the buttons on our coats. Every public event calculated to reinforce the illusion of unity. There were 3 of us growing up: me, Brooke, and Ryan. I was the serious one, the planner, the overachiever. I earned straight A's, joined every club that would have me, and dreamed of working alongside Grandpa Harold in the business he built from a single rundown rental back in the 60s. Brooke was the baby by 7 years, blonde, always smiling, always praised her baby. Albums lined the front hallway, framed in gold, while mine were boxed away in the attic. Her birthdays were catered with pony rides and balloon arches. Mine were homemade cake and pizza from the diner. Down the road, when I graduated from Wharton with honors, my father sent flowers and told me real estate was about instinct, not theory. 2 months later, Brooke barely scraped through her business degree from a state school and came home to a brand new office with a nameplate that read, Vice President. I stayed quiet. I always had. I managed small properties for the company and submitted budgets and reports. No one read. Meanwhile, Brooke floated between departments like a tourist, praised for showing up. The only person who really saw me was Grandpa Harold. He came to my presentations, sat through my endless updates about zoning meetings and new tenants. He once told me, "You've got the fire I had when I started." I held on to that like oxygen. But 2 years ago, everything shifted. Grandpa started forgetting things at first, just names or dates later, entire conversations he moved from his wing. Into the medical suite we built on the 2nd floor, and soon access to him was tightly controlled. I brought him flowers, sat by his bedside, read him memos from work, even when my mother said he couldn't follow them anymore. I wasn't so sure. Sometimes he'd squeeze my hand when I said something about a project or blink with surprising clarity when I mentioned numbers. Still, they said he was slipping, that he didn't need the stress. And so I backed away, believing them like a fool. What I didn't know was that while I was bringing violets and spreadsheets, Brooke was signing papers behind closed doors. Papers that gave her control of the very assets I had poured 5 years of work into. Next time I'll tell you what I found the day I went looking for a quarterly report and opened the wrong folder. 2 weeks after that day in the library, I walked into my father's office looking for quarterly reports and instead found a folder labeled Succession Planning, Confidential. It was half open on his desk, thick with fresh signatures and embossed tabs. I froze for a moment, not sure whether to touch it. But I did. And once I saw what was inside, I knew I hadn't imagined it. The document spelled out the transfer of several major properties, ones I had personally managed for years, directly to Brooke. Not to a trust, not to the 3 of us equally. Just her. My father's name was there too, signed under power of attorney. The date on the paperwork lined up with the spring. My grandfather's health had sharply declined when we were all told he couldn't follow conversations anymore. I heard the door open behind me and turned. My father's face stiffened when he saw what I was holding. "Those are private family matters," he said, walking forward and snatching the folder from my hands. "Private matters that don't include me?" I asked. His eyes didn't soften. Your grandfather and I made decisions that are best for the company's future. Not everyone has the right temperament for wealth management." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He didn't need to. I left the office without another word. That night, I stayed up late at the kitchen table sifting through old reports and memos I'd saved over the past year. I started a spreadsheet, noted dates, cross-referenced names. Daniel came into the room around midnight and saw the papers scattered across the table. "Are you working?" "I think they're moving money," I said. "I think it's been happening for a while." He rubbed the back of his neck, then sat across from me. "You think Brooke knows?" "I don't know," I said, "but I know what I saw." A week later, I visited Grandpa as usual. He was in his chair by the window, a blanket over his knees. He seemed tired, but his eyes flicked toward me when I walked in. I told him about the property sales and the changes happening at Riley Property Group. He didn't speak, just stared at a cardinal outside the glass. "They're saying you can't follow all this," I said softly, "but I think you can." His lips barely moved. "I hear more than they think." He said nothing else that day, but I carried that sentence with me like armor. The next afternoon, I called my brother Ryan. He was in Los Angeles trying to get his band signed. I hadn't seen him in over 6 months. We talked on speakerphone while I folded laundry. "Something feels wrong," I told him. "Brooke is suddenly showing up to every meeting, Dad's changing departments around, and no one's letting me talk to Grandpa alone for more than 5 minutes. Ryan sighed. "You've always been the one to notice that stuff. I guess I just figured it's business as usual." "But it's not," I said. "They're moving things around behind our backs. They're cutting us out." He paused. "You think they're setting Brooke up to take everything I think they already have?" When the holidays came, we gathered at Willow Ridge. Grandpa was wheeled into the living room for the gift exchange. He barely spoke, called Brooke by my name twice, but as I helped him back upstairs afterward, he squeezed my hand. Not gently, deliberately. As we were leaving that night, Brooke pulled me aside. She looked polished, her expression unreadable. "You should start thinking about your future beyond the company," she said. "You and Daniel could move anywhere. Haven't you ever wanted to do something else?" It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. In the weeks that followed, I kept documenting what I could. Daniel said I was obsessed, but I couldn't stop. The numbers didn't lie. Assets were being quietly reassigned. Longtime employees were being moved or let go. Then came the call from our family attorney. The will was being executed early, while Grandpa was still alive, to simplify things. Daniel and I drove to Willow Ridge in silence. The autumn leaves had turned, but I barely saw them. As we parked, he took my hand. "Whatever happens, we still have each other." Inside the library looked like it had been staged for a magazine shoot. Books perfectly aligned, a firelit fresh flowers on the sideboard. My father stood near the mantel, expression smooth and unreadable. My mother sat with her ankles crossed, perfectly dressed in black. Brooke wore a dress that probably cost more than my car, her posture composed and somber. I sat near Ryan, who had flown in late from California and looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then they wheeled in Grandpa. He looked small, thinner than I remembered. His hands were folded neatly in his lap, a plaid blanket across his knees. The lawyer, Mr. Pendleton, began reading the documents. A few lines about charitable donations. A note on transferring company control to my father, which had already been done. Then came the division of ownership, 40% to my father and 20% to each of us siblings. My shoulders eased slightly. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Until Pendleton cleared his throat. As part of Mr. Riley's revised estate plan executed 3 months ago, a significant distribution has already taken place. He read off the assets, the Westlake development, the Greenhurst apartments, the coastal property we'd been planning for 3 years. These have been gifted in full to Brooke Riley, he concluded, and are no longer part of the estate. My head swam. These were the properties I had worked on day and night. They had been promised to all of us. My father stepped forward. "Your grandfather and I discussed this. Brooke has shown great potential. She's earned this." Ryan stood up. "Earned? She lives in a penthouse you pay for and shows up when she feels like it." Brooke flushed. "I've been working. Not everything I do is for show." I laughed once low and without meaning to. "Brooke, last year you asked me what a cap rate was." My mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Amanda, This is exactly the behavior that concerned your grandfather, this competitiveness, this bitterness. I turned to the lawyer. I want to see the documents. After a pause, he handed them over. I found the date. I found the signature. I read them twice. Then I looked across the room to Grandpa. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, until he did. He rose, slowly, deliberately. He stood and said, "I know exactly what you've been doing." Everything after that came to a stop. Next time I'll tell you what he revealed, why none of us truly understood what he'd been planning all along. For a few seconds after Grandpa Harold stood, no one moved. The fire in the hearth kept crackling, but the air in the library had gone still. Brooke sat frozen, one hand resting on her lap, the other tightening around the arm of her chair. My mother pressed her fingertips to her pearls, eyes darting between Grandpa and the lawyer. My father didn't speak. Grandpa's voice was firm. "The will you just heard is a fake." Mr. Pendleton looked confused. "Mr. Riley, these are the documents signed under your authority. They were witnessed and filed when I was supposedly too far gone to understand anything Grandpa asked. When I was sitting in this house being spoon-fed soup and told not to worry about business, no one answered." Grandpa reached into his blazer and pulled out a small silver flash drive. He held it up between his fingers. "This contains every document you tried to hide. The altered statements, the offshore transfers, the signatures you forged in my name." My father took one step forward, then stopped when Grandpa raised a hand. "Don't," Grandpa said. "Not another word." He looked at Mr. Pendleton. "A second copy of this drive is in Judge Brandt's safe. You'll find the letter I wrote him attached, dated and notarized." My mother stood up. "Harold, let's not do this here." "If you're upset, we can sit down," Evelyn, Grandpa said. She sat. He looked at all of us. "You've been watching me shuffle around this house thinking I'm done, that I don't know what's happening around me. You made a mistake." He motioned to the nurse, who brought over a stack of folders and placed them gently on the table. Grandpa settled into the high-backed chair at the head of the library table. 14 months ago, I noticed something strange in the quarterly reports. Rental properties that should have been bringing in steady income were suddenly underperforming. Development budgets bloated without explanation. Costs that didn't line up. He turned to my father. "At first I thought it was just sloppy management. Then I ran it by an old friend, Thomas Brandt, retired judge, spent most of his career prosecuting white-collar crime. He introduced me to a forensic accountant, and what she found confirmed my worst fears." I looked at my father. His face had gone gray. Grandpa continued, "You've been siphoning money out of this company for 8 years. Shell corporations, dummy vendors, phantom contractors. At least $27 million. And you dragged Evelyn into it, too." My mother pressed her lips together. "Richard Grandpa said you didn't just betray the business. You betrayed this family." Brooke made a small sound like a hiccup that caught in her throat. I didn't know she whispered. Dad said it was just to make the taxes cleaner. Grandpa opened one of the folders. "These forms have your signature, Brooke. They gave you ownership over accounts in the Caymans. Do you know what's in them?" She shook her head. "No. He always said I didn't need to worry about the details." "She didn't do this," my father said, stepping forward again. "I handled it. Leave her out of it, like you left Amanda out," Grandpa asked, his voice quieter now. "The only one of you who actually knew how to read a profit sheet." Daniel's hand found mine under the table. I hadn't even noticed how tightly I'd been gripping the edge. Grandpa tapped one more folder. "The will you heard today that wasn't mine. I never authorized it. I never agreed to disinherit Amanda or Ryan, and I never gave Richard power of attorney." He looked at Mr. Pendleton. "I'd like you to read the correct documents now." Mr. Pendleton opened the new folder, eyes scanning the front page. "These have already been reviewed by Judge Brandt," Grandpa added, "and signed off by a court-appointed notary." Mr. Pendleton cleared his throat. "Riley Property Group is hereby placed into a permanent family trust. Amanda Riley named as primary trustee. Ryan Riley as secondary." Brooke blinked. "Charles and Evelyn Riley are removed from all leadership positions effective immediately," the lawyer continued. "You can't do this," my father said, voice low. "I've been managing this company for 15 years, managing, Grandpa said. "You've been bleeding it dry." My mother stood again. "We'll challenge this. You're not of sound mind. I was examined last week without your knowledge," Grandpa replied. "The report is signed and filed. Judge Brandt has a copy. I'm competent. And I'm done staying quiet." Then he paused. "There's one more thing," he said. He looked at Ryan, then at me. "Richard isn't my biological son." No one said a word. After a moment, Ryan asked, "What do you mean?" Grandpa's eyes didn't move. "Your grandmother and I were married 3 years when she got pregnant. We'd been struggling to conceive. I was overjoyed, didn't ask questions. Years later, after she died, I found her journals. She had a brief affair with my former business partner. My father didn't react. I never told him," Grandpa said. "I raised him like he was mine. I gave him everything. But he never really understood the legacy because he never helped build it, and now he's tried to burn it down." My mother's voice cracked. "So you're punishing him for something he didn't know." Grandpa's gaze didn't waver. "I'm holding him accountable for what he chose to do and what he chose to take." My father's jaw clenched. "This is revenge." "No," Grandpa said. "This is protection. And a chance to start over with the people who haven't lost their way." I looked at Brooke. Her eyes were red. She didn't speak. Mr. Pendleton finished reading. "Charles and Evelyn retained 15% ownership to provide income only, no control. Brooke retains 10% and her current title subject to probationary review." My father looked at my mother. "We're leaving," he said. "Brooke, let's go." Brooke hesitated. "Brooke." My mother repeated, sharper this time. Brooke stood and followed them out. The door closed behind them with a thud that echoed in the quiet. No one spoke for a long time. Grandpa finally looked at me. "Tomorrow morning we meet with the board. Amanda, you'll speak first." I nodded once. In the garden later that night, Ryan sat beside me on the bench. "Co-trustees," he said. "Who saw that coming?" I smiled faintly. "We're stuck with each other." "Not so bad," he said. "I'll handle investors. You do the rest." The next morning, Grandpa invited me into his study. It smelled like cedar and old books. He took out a photo album I'd never seen, construction sites, ribbon cuttings, handshakes. He turned the pages slowly. "Your grandmother was the heart of all this," he said, "but she made a mistake, and I made another by keeping it buried." He turned one more page. A picture of my father shaking his hand in front of a steel frame. "I tried to love him fully," he said, "but something always held back." He closed the album. Secrets spread like rot. They move through families. We clean it now or pass it on. Before I could answer, Ryan stepped into the room. "Dad's downstairs," he said. "He's in your office, shredding something." And just like that, the next chapter began. We found my father in Grandpa Harold's office just after sunrise. The door was ajar. Ryan stepped in first, and I followed. A stack of shredded documents sat on the floor beneath the console shredder. My father didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression didn't change. "Old invoices," he said. "Nothing important." Ryan didn't respond. He bent down, picking up a piece of paper that hadn't fed through cleanly. My father turned off the machine. "You shouldn't be in here." Grandpa appeared in the doorway a moment later, holding the walking stick he rarely used in front of others. "Charles," he said, "I've called our legal team. They'll be here by 10. My father opened a cabinet, pulled out a briefcase, and clicked it shut. "We'll see what the courts say," he replied. "You think this is finished, but it's not." He left through the garden door. By mid-morning, we had confirmation that he and my mother had left Willow Ridge for their penthouse in Manhattan. Brooke wasn't with them. Grandpa moved into our house temporarily. The guest room was small, but Daniel set up his reading lamp and filled the bookshelf with old volumes of architecture and development history. "Feels more like home than the manor ever did," Grandpa said the second evening over chicken soup and soft rye. Within a week, court papers arrived. My parents had filed a petition challenging Grandpa's mental competence. They submitted reports from 2 specialists, doctors we later learned had been flown in months earlier and paid through a shell company. Judge Brandt had the case reassigned to Judge Lillian Kerr, a name I didn't know. "She's fair," Grandpa said. "Worked probate for 2 decades. Doesn't care for drama." He was right. Judge Kerr ordered a full evaluation by a neutral geriatric psychiatrist. 2 weeks later, the results came in. Mild memory decline, no impact on executive function. When the ruling was read aloud in court, my father didn't even blink. Their second tactic came fast, an emergency injunction to freeze the leadership transition. Our attorneys argued back. Judge Kerr denied the motion, citing lack of standing. Then came the press. An anonymous post appeared on a real estate forum accusing me of manipulating my grandfather. Another followed on social media, accompanied by a picture of Brooke and Grandpa taken 5 years ago. The caption read, "Some people will do anything for a legacy, even if it means dividing a family." Brooke didn't name me, but the implication was obvious. Daniel read it and set his phone down quietly. "She's choosing a side." I nodded. But 2 nights later, a message arrived. Brooke wanted to meet. We sat across from each other in the garden behind the courthouse where the stone benches stayed warm from the afternoon sun. "I didn't write that caption," she said, "but I approved it." She kept her eyes down. "Dad said it would make people see the whole thing differently." I believed him. I listened. "I thought I was helping him protect what Grandpa built," she added. "But now I'm not sure who's been protecting what." I didn't speak. After a few moments, she stood up. "I don't know what happens next. I just wanted you to hear it from me." Back at home, Grandpa and I worked late each night preparing documentation. Ryan handled the investors. Daniel stayed quiet, making dinner, walking the dog, folding laundry, while I missed bedtime 3 nights in a row. One Friday, I snapped at him for not picking up dry cleaning. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood in the doorway holding his keys. "You're tired," he said. "We'll be fine. We always are." He kissed my forehead and left to get it himself. In the middle of all of it, Ryan surprised me. He learned faster than any of us expected. He turned old band flyers into pitch decks. He spoke to our backers with calm, practiced ease. He even got one of our oldest clients to stay just by making a call and listening. "Turns out I'm not bad at this," he said one day in the break room pouring coffee. "Selling condos is like selling merch, just a longer timeline." I smiled. 3 weeks later, we stood in front of Judge Kerr again. My father's legal team had launched a full challenge against the new trust, arguing fraud, undue influence, and breach of fiduciary duty. Our side submitted the files Grandpa had compiled, the transfer records, the forensic analysis, the timelines. For an hour, we answered questions. I read prepared notes. Ryan read from ledgers. The courtroom was quiet. Brooke didn't attend. My mother did, sitting in the back row, with her coat folded neatly in her lap. She didn't speak. After the hearing, I went to retrieve my bag from the hallway bench and found a sealed envelope tucked into the side pocket. Inside was a single photocopied page from one of my mother's diaries dated nearly 25 years ago. "Harold suspects something. Richard says we need to move faster. I'm afraid of what that means." I stared at it for a long time. The note underneath was unsigned. It said more where this came from. "Riverside Park, 2 p.m. tomorrow." When I arrived, I sat on the bench and waited. At 2:03, a woman in a long coat and scarf sat beside me. I recognized her voice before I saw her face. Greta, my mother's personal assistant for nearly 20 years. "I don't have much time," she said, keeping her eyes forward. "I can't pretend anymore." She handed me a small package wrapped in plain paper. "You never saw me," she said, and stood. Inside were 3 notebooks, my mother's handwriting, spanning more than 2 decades. They documented everything: shifts in funds, falsified budgets, investor pitches designed to mislead. Each entry was signed, dated, written in her crisp cursive. We had them authenticated by a third-party analyst. They matched her hand exactly. We submitted them to the court the following week. Judge Kerr allowed them in. Afterward, Grandpa sat beside me in the hallway. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "Truth has its own weight, even when it arrives quietly." I nodded. The next part of the story came quickly, faster than we could prepare for, because what we uncovered next was worse than we expected. Not just misdirection, not just favoritism, but over $2 million simply gone. No trail, no explanation, no return. The discovery that over $2 million had vanished came during a routine audit meeting. Our accounting team laid out transfer logs across the boardroom table, timelines, vendor chains, routing paths. We traced everything until the trail went cold in a cluster of offshore fronts with no visible owners. "We may never recover this portion," the lead auditor said. "It's been washed through too many places." Intentionally, I stared at the last printed ledger. Each entry was clean, even clinical. There was no note, no explanation, just the total at the bottom circled in red. That night, I got home later than usual. Daniel was waiting in the kitchen with a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite Italian place. He had already poured a glass for me, and he'd set a place at the table. "No ledgers tonight," he said, gently pulling out the chair. I sat, loosened my hair, and let the quiet settle. We didn't talk about the business. We didn't talk about court. Just food and the dog, and a recipe he wanted to try that weekend. Halfway through dinner, my phone rang. Ryan's name lit up on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Dad called me," he said. "Wants to meet. Just the two of us." I looked across the table. Daniel didn't say anything, just waited. "What did you tell him?" I asked. I said I'd think about it, Ryan said. "I think I want to hear what he has to say." "He's trying to divide us," I said. "I know," he replied. "But he's still our father, and part of me just wants to know why." I let the silence linger. Finally, I said, "If you go, I'm coming too." We never got the chance. Early the next morning, our attorney called. My father had boarded a private flight overnight. The destination was a country with no extradition treaty. When questioned, my mother claimed she hadn't known his plans. The investigators didn't believe her. Neither did we. The FBI took over from there. They froze every asset in my father's name that could be traced: bank accounts, holdings, trusts. But we all knew he had planned for this. Whatever he took, he wouldn't give back. By the time the headlines reached the local news, I had already received a second call, this one from my doctor. A routine appointment, nothing urgent. I had gone alone the week prior, mostly to check a few small things that didn't seem important. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I didn't speak for a full minute. "Would you like to schedule your next visit?" the nurse asked on the other end. I said yes. When I told Daniel that night, his eyes welled immediately. We stood together in the living room, his hands on my waist, his forehead resting gently against mine. "New life," he whispered. "After all of this." When I told Grandpa, he reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over mine. "That's the beauty of it," he said. "Life goes on." 1 year after the day, Grandpa Harold stood in the library and changed everything we gathered again at Willow Ridge. No court papers, no legal teams, just family. We had removed the heavy drapes, taken down most of the art my mother had chosen, and opened up the old formal rooms to let in more light. The house felt less like a monument and more like a place where people actually lived. My father remained abroad. We heard through our legal counsel that he'd settled into a villa on the coast, one with high walls and hired security. No one expected him to return. Most of his funds had been frozen, but we knew he had buried plenty in places we couldn't reach. My mother had struck a deal, limited immunity in exchange for cooperation. She now lived in a modest apartment outside Boston. No staff, no drivers, no parties. She hadn't asked to see us, and we hadn't offered. Brooke had changed the most. After the court hearing, she entered therapy and moved out of the penthouse. She took a real position in the company's charitable foundation. No title, no fanfare. Just a desk and a quiet corner and a team she was learning to lead. One afternoon, she brought over homemade soup and asked if she could hold the baby. She sat with Jacob in her arms for nearly an hour without saying much at all. "He smells like oatmeal," she said finally and smiled. At the next board meeting, Grandpa Harold waited until the end to speak. "I've made a decision," he said. "We're selling Willow Ridge." Ryan blinked. "Wait, what this house Grandpa said has carried too many secrets. Too much weight. It's time we build something new on clean ground." He pulled out a folder with architectural plans. 3 homes, side by side, just across the lake. One for Amanda and Daniel. One for me. One for Ryan. Brooke looked down at the table. "And me?" she asked quietly. Grandpa met her eyes. "Your probationary period ends next month. The foundation reports say you found your rhythm there. If you want to stay, really stay, we'll build a 4th. She nodded. "I'd like to stay near Jacob," she said. "I want to be the kind of aunt who shows up." That night we had dinner together at the long oak table one last time. No tension, no games, just food, laughter, and Jacob gurgling in his high chair reaching for a bread roll. After dessert, we stepped out onto the terrace. The lake was calm. The moonlight stretched across the water like silver thread. "Do you regret it?" I asked Grandpa quietly. He rested his hands on the railing. "No," he said. "Secrets don't disappear. They sink into the foundation. We had to break the old one to build something better. He looked back at the house, then at Daniel rocking Jacob gently near the window. "And look what came from the wreckage," he said. "Something honest, something lasting." The next morning we broke ground on the new land. 5 of us stood together, me, Daniel, Ryan, Grandpa, and Brooke. Jacob wobbled between us, gripping his tiny shovel with both hands. We planted the first stakes. And for the first time in years, the future felt like something we could trust. The ground broke soft that morning. Light wind came off the lake, brushing across our shoulders as we each took a turn with the shovel. Grandpa Harold insisted we keep it simple, just the 5 of us and Jacob, who gripped the handle of his miniature spade like it was something sacred. Ryan tossed the first soil. Daniel followed. Brooke stood quietly beside me until it was her turn. She didn't hesitate. We lingered a little while afterward. The lots had been marked the lake stretching out below like a wide silver ribbon. Behind us, Willow Ridge still stood, but it felt smaller now, almost quiet in a way it never had before. By mid-afternoon, we were back at the office. Ryan was finalizing materials for the next investor meeting. I sat in the conference room sorting through the final quarter's internal audits. Brooke had taken a call from the local youth shelter. We were expanding a program through the foundation, and she'd been leading the planning without anyone asking her to. The pace was steady, but manageable. We had sold 3 non-performing properties. The funds went directly into revitalizing our core developments. Grandpa had pulled in 2 of his oldest contacts to serve in advisory roles, not board positions, just honest second sets of eyes. "We fix it brick by brick," he said, "one decision at a time." On Wednesdays, he met with me in the upstairs office to review forecasts and sign-offs. We'd sit side by side near the bay window where the light caught the edge of the papers just right. "You still read contracts like you're looking for buried treasure," he said one morning. I looked up from the page. "Aren't I?" He smiled without answering. Ryan stopped by during one of those meetings with a fresh mug of coffee and news from a downtown client. It had been years since he lived on the East Coast, but now he was walking to work and making dinner in his own kitchen. "Funny," he said one evening. "I didn't think I'd like the quiet." "You're not quiet," I said. "No," he agreed. "But I think I needed it." Jacob was growing fast. We took turns watching him during meetings, whoever wasn't speaking rocking the stroller back and forth with a foot or rolling a toy car across the floor. Daniel adjusted his teaching schedule, picking up more early classes and dropping his evening workload. He walked Jacob in the afternoons, sometimes down by the water, sometimes just around the block until he nodded off. One morning, Daniel stepped into the office holding a sealed envelope. "Certified mail," he said, "from the Federal Investigator's Office." I opened it slowly. Inside was a brief memo. The search for the missing $2 million was officially being transferred to a joint federal financial task force. They suspected that some of the accounts had been closed and converted to digital assets under alternate identification codes. The letter included a contact name and a direct phone number. "So it's not over," Ryan said. "Not yet," I replied. We gathered the next morning in the smaller conference room with our legal team. Brooke came in midway through carrying folders from her end of the foundation's review. She laid them on the table and paused. "I think I found something," she said. "An old budget approval from 3 years ago. It has both Dad's and Mom's initials, but it doesn't match the official ledger totals." We scanned the page together. A shortfall, just under $70,000. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to ask questions. "And it was recurring," Brooke said, flipping to the next page. "Same amount. 3 quarters in a row. We submitted the documents to the task force that afternoon. By Friday, the office felt heavier again. Not tense exactly, just focused. Like the feeling before a storm when the air changes but nothing has fallen yet. Grandpa stopped by my desk that evening on his way out. "You look like your grandmother when you're buried in paperwork," he said. "Did she do this too?" I asked. He nodded. "She managed everything I didn't understand at first. Balance sheets, timelines, legal language. I built it, but she kept it upright." He tapped the edge of the desk gently. "Just like you're doing now." I didn't answer right away. Then I asked, "Do you think we'll find all of it?" The money, he didn't hesitate. "Maybe not, but we'll account for every piece that can be traced." "That's the work," Jacob cried from his bassinet in the corner. Grandpa walked over and picked him up, rocking gently until he quieted again. "Truth is a long game," he said without turning around. The weekend brought a brief pause. We took Jacob to the botanical gardens on Saturday. Brooke joined us mid-afternoon with a thermos of tea and a box of crackers shaped like animals. Ryan met us there straight from a morning appointment. We sat on a bench while Jacob napped in the stroller, watching sunlight move across the tops of the hedges. "You think Mom will ever show up again?" Ryan asked. No one answered right away. "Maybe," I said, but not as the person we used to know. Brooke reached down and tucked the blanket tighter around Jacob's feet. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." The next week started like any other. Emails, budgets, calls. But the message we received on Wednesday morning changed everything. It was from a blocked number. And it wasn't a voice, just a picture. A grainy, still frame from a security camera. And the man walking down the hallway in it was my father. The image arrived without warning. One still frame, no message, no return number. It showed a hallway, marble floors, high windows, unfamiliar architecture. And there in the center mid-stride was my father. He wore a dark overcoat and sunglasses. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 days earlier. I forwarded the image to our contact at the Financial Crimes Task Force. By noon, I was on a call with a federal investigator named Patrick Delaney. "The building is part of a diplomatic housing complex," he said. "Eastern European jurisdiction, high security, limited access. We've had eyes in the area, but this confirms he's been moving." Daniel stood beside me in the kitchen, arms crossed, listening quietly. "Does this change anything on our end?" I asked. "Not directly," Delaney replied. "But it helps. We're working with Interpol now." After I hung up, we sat for a while without speaking. Jacob played on the floor beside us, stacking rings in crooked towers, knocking them over one by one. Later that afternoon, Ryan stopped by the office with a folder full of investor updates. He set them on my desk, then dropped into the chair across from me. "He's not finished," Ryan said. "I know," I replied. "But neither are we." He stayed through dinner. We ate at the long table in Grandpa's study. Brooke joined us halfway through, carrying a set of revised foundation grant proposals and a pie she'd picked up from a farm stand just outside town. "They still use a cash box," she said, setting it down. "No card reader. Just trust." Grandpa chuckled softly. That used to be normal. The next morning, I received a call from a woman named Sarah Whitcomb. She was one of our newer legal interns helping review historical contracts. "Ms. Riley, I found something you might want to see." She met me in the archive room with a manila envelope in her hands. "This was buried in the third quarter files from 5 years ago," she said. "I wasn't looking for it. It just didn't match the date range." Inside were 2 documents. Both looked like vendor contracts for landscaping services. But the vendor names didn't appear in any of our approved databases. Sarah pointed to the signature line. "Your father signed both, and the routing numbers trace back to the same account we flagged last month." I thanked her and called our accountant. By noon, we had confirmation another $250,000 had passed through those phantom contracts. The board met that Friday. We laid everything out. Ryan walked them through the numbers. Brooke explained the internal controls we'd implemented since the transition. I closed with a timeline showing every discrepancy we'd uncovered since Grandpa first stood up in the library. There were no raised voices, no objections, just quiet nods and pens scratching across legal pads. Afterward, one of the board members, a woman named Helen Moore, asked to speak with me privately. "I joined the company when your father was just out of college," she said. "I remember the way he looked at opportunity. Hungry. Maybe too hungry." She paused. "You don't have that same look, and that's a good thing." Outside, the sun had begun to dip low. The sky turned amber, the clouds brushed in pale lavender and gold. We gathered again at the edge of the construction site, just the family. The foundations were poured now, outlines of the walls beginning to take shape. Jacob toddled between the markers, his steps clumsy but determined. Daniel followed close behind a hand, always ready to catch him. Grandpa stood beside me, leaning slightly on his cane. "You've done well," he said. "They're following your lead now." "We're all leading together," I said. Maybe he replied, "But you were the first to see what was coming, and the only one who didn't look away." He turned to watch Jacob fall gently into the grass. Brooke scooped him up, brushing off his knees. "You think he'll remember any of this?" I asked. Grandpa didn't answer right away. "Not the details," he said, "but he'll grow up inside the truth, and that will shape everything else." The wind picked up off the lake. Daniel called across the field. "He's hungry." "Again?" I laughed. "He's always hungry." We headed back to the cars, the light behind us softening into dusk. On the drive home, Ryan texted me. A single line. "Check your email." I opened it at the red light. One new message. Subject line update from Interpol. Attachment scanned passport. And there beneath the red watermark was my father's name. Not the one we knew. A new one. A full alias. Filed 2 years before the will reading. He had started preparing long before any of us had noticed. And we weren't finished yet. The weeks that followed brought more paperwork and a few official statements. But the hardest part was learning to live with what couldn't be undone. My father had left a trail so carefully laid that not every dollar would ever be traced. Not every wrong could be made right in a courtroom. Still, day by day, we settled into our new lives, one without secrets hanging over the dinner table or dread building before every phone call. The construction on the new homes moved steadily. Every few days, I walked the lots with Daniel and Jacob, our boots squishing into the soft earth sunlight, glinting off the lake in the distance. Grandpa Harold always found something to point out, a stone worth saving the curve of a foundation wall, a memory from the early days when every project felt like a leap of faith. Brooke came by often. She brought over leftover cookies from her office or a new book for Jacob, and sometimes she stayed for hours, just talking quietly, rebuilding what had been broken. Ryan spent more evenings with us than not. His laughter filled the rooms, chasing out the last shadows from years of tension. As spring melted into summer, Willow Ridge was finally put up for sale. The process was quiet, almost gentle. Grandpa gathered us all in the living room one last time, the same place where so many family meetings had turned sharp or cold in the past. He thanked us for staying, for seeing things through, for letting go of the things that needed to be left behind. When the final paperwork was signed, we stood together on the old porch, watching the sun set beyond the trees. Jacob played at our feet, giggling, Brooke tossing a ball for him, while Ryan strummed an old tune on the porch swing. Daniel stood at my side, his hand warm in mine. Grandpa Harold looked at each of us, his eyes full and clear. "What matters," he said softly, "is not what you inherit, but what you choose to build next." I understood then that justice isn't always about seeing every wrong repaid. Sometimes it's about refusing to carry the weight of others' choices and quietly building something stronger for those who come after. I hope wherever you are, you find a way to lay down whatever burdens you've carried and to trust that truth, once spoken, can open the door to a different kind of peace. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If any part of my story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or simply know you're out there listening. Sometimes, just knowing we're not alone is enough.